Hi, I'm Evo Bluestein, and I'd like to read a little bit from my new book, Wind Blowing Across a Field, Wisdom and Tales from 23 Musicians, compiled and edited by myself and my wife, Juliana Harris. Uh, I'll read a little bit from the introduction. By the way, this is available on Amazon or at my website, evobluestein.com. Professor Mark Simos from the Berklee School of Music starts it off with a couple of comments. Traditional music inoculates our brains against being completely overwhelmed and swept away by the influence of technology. It wakes you up in a certain way that the rest of our culture is working very actively to erode. Each music tradition has its own set of peculiar secrets. The deeper you dig, the more weird and fascinating stuff you find. This book explores the world of folk musicians of a certain era, one that preceded computers and the internet. An old time fiddler from Missouri said the only way he and his brothers learned a new tune was when a traveling fiddler came through town. They did their best to remember the tune after the guest had gone. Many of the people I interviewed learned directly from an older generation of master folk musicians. Speaking about his childhood, Armenian oud master Richard Hagopian, living in California, said, I knew all the regional music from playing with the old timers. Most of the interviewees were learning and honing their technical skills in musicology between the 1960s and 70s. Except for a couple of interviews, it's not the story of the previous generation who learned in the age old method by ear from family or other community members. Rather, these people learned in an era where students could still find the old timers, visit them, and learn directly. One could obtain a first hand apprenticeship and deep understanding of the culture from which the music derives. The experience of learning from master folk musicians was invaluable. The other useful method of the era relied upon the technology of the day, tape recordings and vinyl records. In the 1950s and 60s, there were no higher education programs for studying traditional music, and there were few instruction books for American folk tunes or any international styles. Records became an important source for learning, especially for those who did not have access to skilled teachers. The folk boom of the 1960s was the beginning of a new awareness, an awareness of who America had become, a period of learning to appreciate that every ethnic group had cultural value and contributed to the whole of American life. It was an understanding conducive to democracy, a chance to reflect on how our nation developed. Though many cultures are integral to the American experience, it became clear that some traditions were particularly strong, such as African American and Anglo Celtic. Today, most of the older generation of tradition bearers have passed on. The methods used by the interviewees here, visits and apprenticeships, are no longer possible. Listening to their accounts is illuminating and demonstrates how the world has changed in a relatively short time. This is part of the introduction to Wind Blowing Across a Field, Wisdom and Tales from 23 Musicians, available on Amazon and evobluestein.com. I hope you'll check it out, and thank you for listening.